Well, it's good to see you today. I didn't mention, but we have some guests with us today that came just to watch our movie last night, all the way from Florida. Good to have you folks with us here today. And we are continuing on in our series in the book of Ecclesiastes. And today we are going to be in chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. If someone were to ask you the question, what do you want out of life? What would your answer be? What do you want out of life? Well, some people might say, I want a good job. I want success. I want to have a wife or husband and family. I want to live in a good neighborhood. I want to have a vacation spot. I want to be able to go on vacation every year all over the world. So for some people, the thing that they want out of life is money or stuff or position or pleasure or happiness. And for others, it might be to have enough money or enough power or enough possessions just to be able to exist and not have to worry. Everybody has something in life that they desire. But pleasure, or things that bring us pleasure, are the things that we seem to be most interested in. What someone has called the pleasure explosion has overtaken us, so that in the United States, listen to this, the pleasure business has been growing at an average rate of $6 billion a year since 1965. So since I was born, every year, the pleasure industry, the pleasure business has increased $6 billion a year. I mean, some of the things that we see that people spend money on that brings about pleasure. We see people making sure they have all the best TV channels and cable channels and sports networks and movie networks. We have people that want to make sure they have the newest house and the newest clothes and the best designers. We have people that want to have the best in game systems and the best in games, right, Gracie? We spend so much of our time, so much of our money on things that will bring us pleasure. That can be just about anything, can't it? It doesn't have to be something physical that we can actually touch. It can actually be something that gives us a pleasurable feeling. Something like the cable television that we watch, or going to sporting events that make us happy inside and sometimes make us angry inside. And if you're a Browns fan, can make you disappointed at times. As we look at life in our world today, we see that so many people are looking for pleasure. And pleasure in and of itself, we think, will bring us happiness. We think if I just had another dollar, if I just had a little bit more money in the bank, if I just had a nicer house, if I just had a few more clothes, then everything would just be peachy keen, hunky-dory, and my life would be full. And I would never be sad again. How's that working for you? You know, it seems like the more we have, the more we want. We continue our series in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and here King Solomon describes his pursuit of pleasure. Being a man of great wealth and power, he has more resources to pursue these pleasures than we can even imagine. However, after trying every avenue that brings pleasure into a person's life, after trying to experience all there is to experience in life that's going to bring him happiness, we find that only God you can only find true happiness in the Lord. So this morning I want us to take a look, and we're going to have to go through this quickly unless you want to be here till supper time, because in this passage there are 7 or 8, I've lost track, of how many things he experiences that we try to experience in our lives to bring us happiness. And after each one, he makes the statement, it's all meaningless. The first one, this one I can relate to. In Ecclesiastes 2:1-2, it says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out who is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? The first thing that Solomon turns to here is comedy, or things that make him laugh and bring joy and happiness. When you laugh, how does that make you feel? Feels good. Science has proven that when we laugh, it produces endorphins in the brain, and the endorphins are the feel-good hormones that we have. It's those feelings of euphoria sometimes. Have you ever saw something that was so funny that you just laughed and laughed and laughed? You hurt so bad you were laughing. You were drawn to tears because of the comedy, the funny situation that you saw. Laughter is good medicine. Pleasure from laughter helps. Now, there are appropriate times for that, and there's inappropriate times. I was once in a funeral, sitting in the back, and the minister said something, and the person next to me whispered a response or a retort to what the minister said in that service, and I got the giggles. Have you ever got those? You try to hold back, and the harder you try, the more you want to burst out laughing. Well, finally, I held off as long as I could, and the minister said something that was very sad. And I used that opportunity to... And everybody looked at me. And I know what was going through their mind, not how irreverent and disrespectful that young man is. They were thinking, boy, he must have really loved her to be that heartbroken. See, comedy has a season. There is a time and a place for it, but even when it's in the right place, at the right time, during the right season, Solomon said that in and of itself is not going to bring you true happiness. It will for a short time. The endorphins will work for a while, but they wear off, and you're right back to where you were before. It's fine to watch TV shows that are funny, go to the movies, read articles, as long as they're clean. But these things are okay, but don't try to find true happiness in humor or in those things, because comedy isn't going to fulfill it. The second thing he points out is in verse 3, Ecclesiastes chapter 2:3 says, I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. Some people resort to alcohol or to partying because they think that's going to bring them happiness. I don't know how many of you are drinkers, how many of you are not, but the story is told about a preacher who was preaching in a very strict Baptist church. His name was Steve Chalk, and he tells this story that in his younger days he was preaching a sermon on the miracle at the wedding feast where Jesus turned water into wine. Now, this church was so strict about alcohol that they didn't allow you to, they didn't want you to drink it. They didn't want you to go to places that served it. They didn't even want you to sniff the cork, because it's alcohol, it's wrong, it's a sin. Well, he got up and was preaching about Jesus turning water into wine. And being a young minister that was a little bit brassy, he said, when he came to the part about Jesus and turning the water into wine, he asked the question, and what is in this event in the life of Jesus all about? What does this miracle mean? What was Jesus trying to say to the people there and the people and us people today? And nobody answered. So he said, you know what Jesus was trying to say? He was trying to tell them, gang, the drinks are on me. He wasn't at that church much longer after saying that. But I'm not sure that what Steve said was right or wrong. What Jesus was saying may have been the drinks are on me. We don't know what he said, but we do know what he did. I'm not going to stand up here and be one of those puritanical preachers that say all alcohol's bad, don't drink it, it's a sin, stay away from it. I'm not going to say that. But what I am going to say, folks, is this. It's not going to bring you happiness. You're not going to find happiness, and you're not going to get out of your sorrows by climbing into a bottle. It may feel good for a while, but what happens afterwards can be very devastating to you as well as those people you love, those people you live with, those people that you work with. There are some people within this congregation today who are recovering alcoholics. And some of them, Dean Johnson, how many years, Dean, sober?
Almost 27.
Praise God for that. Praise God for that. And I'm not saying don't take a drink. I'm not saying it's, but for him, yes. For him, no, he can't touch it. Here's the bottom line. It's not going to bring you the happiness that you may be thinking you are going to get from it. So be careful. Maybe it's best if you have a compulsive or an addictive personality to stay clear, because you can fall into something you may not be able to get out of, or it may be hard for you to get out of. What Solomon is saying here is alcohol, partying, having all of these great fun times that may be on the borderline of questionable, it's meaningless. That's not what life's about. That's not what's going to bring you happiness. Thirdly, verses 4 through 6 of Ecclesiastes 2 says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Solomon thought that by keeping busy doing projects was going to bring him happiness. He builds a palace, beautiful palace. Still doesn't make him happy. Spends money to improve the city by putting in parks and planting beautiful vineyards. Still doesn't bring him happiness. Sometimes we think that if I just stay busy, if I work on my house or work on improving my property, that's going to bring happiness. But you know what I have found from being a homeowner for almost 30 years now? You're never done. There's always more weeds to pull. There's more grass to mow. There's more windows to wash. There's more gutters to clean. There's more hot water tanks to fix. And your list goes on and on and on. Just when you get it the way you like it, something happens to mess up your little world. There's a gentleman in this neighborhood, and I'm not going to mention names or say where he lives, but this man, I think, worships every day at the temple of yard. Honestly, that yard has to be perfectly manicured. I think I saw him out there one day with a ruler measuring his grass. Now, it's all right to have a nice yard. It's okay to have a nice house and a clean house and all of these things that might make you feel good at the end of the day. But that's not going to bring you happiness, true happiness. So Solomon says home improvements are not going to bring happiness, that it's still all meaningless. Number 4, servants. Ecclesiastes 2:7 says, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. Now, it might be easy to discount what he's saying here because we don't have slaves today. Most of us don't have servants that cook for us and clean for us, and unless, of course, you're married, guys. At least sometimes that's the way we look at them. But we don't have the same type of things. So you're saying, well, let's just skip over this one. I can't. Number 1, it's there, and I have to talk about it, or I'm not doing the Scripture justice. But on the other hand, we do have servants today that we hold in high esteem, that we feel we can't live without. Things like microwaves, dishwashers, ovens. Talking to Jeff Ecker last night, he was, after the movie, he pulls out his car keys. He walks away from the welcome table, and he has left a bottle of ice water sitting there. And he walks away. And I said, Jeff, I said, don't forget your ice water. He said, oh, I'm coming back. I'm just walking close enough that I can start my truck to get the air conditioner running. We like those, don't we? Those self-starters. We like that air conditioning, don't we? How many of you honestly would be here today if this church did not have air conditioning? Some of you might have thought twice before leaving your homes that have air conditioning to come. But there are servants that we have in our lives that we hold in high regard, and we think the more of those servants we have, the happier we're going to be. Well, I'm here to tell you that I have a lot of those servants in my house and have had a lot in my life, and my life could still be miserable. Because you always want something more. We had what I thought at the time I got it for my wife for Christmas about 5 years ago, a 42-inch flat screen Teller TV, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven because the old television we had was about that big and color, and it wasn't a flat screen and didn't have HD on it. So she bought that for me, and I was so happy with that, and I was so satisfied with that until I went to my brother's house, and he had a 70-inch TV. And here about 3 months ago, we were visiting my brother, and when he had moved, the screen had gotten damaged, and there was a line going down through it, so he had it stored in the garage. He was just going to throw it out. I said, hey, bro, you just going to dump that 70-inch TV just for a little line? He said, yeah, it's no good. I said, I'll take it off your hands. So I did. And I watched it, and I was so excited. It took up the whole wall of my living room. It was like being at Regal Cinema every day. Until the line started to spread. And all of a sudden, almost 1/4 of that screen was you couldn't see it. Well, my kids thought I was crazy for getting it in the first place. They said, "How can you sit out here and watch this with that line down there?" I'm thinking, I used to watch a black and white this big when I was a kid. And you're going to complain about a little line? Get with it. Well, they're millennials. What are you going to do? Love you guys. Yep, that was a mistake. Anyway. Anyhow, got rid of that TV. I thought this will be just fine. Until we were down at Best Buy 2 weeks ago. And they had a sale. A sale. How many inch TV is that we got, Lisa? 50 what? 55. It's smaller than the 70, but it's a whole lot bigger than the 42. And you can see 100% of the screen. And I got it for $299. Woo! Yeah, praise you. Thank you, Jesus. You dropped that one into my lap. All of a sudden, that big 70-inch TV, it's unplugged sitting out in the hallway now. I don't have the heart to throw it out. So if anybody wants a TV that has about 1/4 of the screen blacked out, you're welcome to it. I'm not hauling it, but you're welcome to come and get it. So we always want something bigger and better, right? And this TV is a smart TV. And we're able to, right on the screen, you can just push a button and get Netflix. You can watch PureFlix if you pay for it. You can watch all of these channels and oh, it's Christmas in July! But you know what? That has made me happy for about a week and a half. And the happiness is waning a little bit, but until the next big thing comes out. Folks, Solomon says, you can't find true happiness in servants or those things that serve us and make us happy. Number 5, status symbols. Verses 7 and 9 of Ecclesiastes 2 says, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. He had all those things of his day that gave him status. He had servants, slaves, and had had them for some time. He had herds and flocks, more than anyone in Jerusalem, not just then, but ever before. It says, I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. He had the status, man. He was the guy. He was the one that everybody compared things to. You know, it's like saying, you know, you're richer than Rockefeller. No, you're richer, you know, if you've got that much money, you know, you're richer than Solomon. Or you're wealthier than Solomon. Or you've got more houses than Solomon. Well, nobody did, but if that's how they would compare to status and symbol. It's interesting that in Time magazine in 1971, labor experts were predicting that by the new millennia, that's now, by the way, we would be on a national 4-day work week and have an abundance of leisure time. Isn't that great? Almost 50 years ago, they said, in 50 years, people are going to have 4-day work weeks and have all the leisure time they want. Well, you know what? They're wrong. There are a lot of people that work 4-day work weeks. I mean, it used to be 40 hours a week was full time. Lisa just got hired full time over at the Merriman, and as long as she puts in, 32 hours a week, it's considered full time. That's a 4-day work week. Full time. And she's now, since she got that job, she has all the leisure time in the world. Why not? Because what do we do with our time? We put stuff in it. It's like being given a big, open grocery cart saying, now you are free. And we go through the aisles of life and we say, well, I can put a little time here, and we put that in. And we go down the aisle a little, oh yeah, I need some of that, and we put it in. And before we know it, our basket's fuller than it was when we were doing the 40-hour work week. Those of you that retired, Gil, let me ask you a question, my friend. Since you have retired, do you have more or less free time? Do you? Becky, you're not working him hard enough. Now I'm getting a look from Larry right here, whose wife is a slave driver. Larry, do you have more free time now than when you were working? No. Most of the time, I don't think we do, from people I've talked to, because what we do is, now we go from 40-hour work weeks to goose egg. But everybody knows that, right? You're not doing anything, Larry. Why don't you come paint my house? They find stuff for us to do. And we make the choice whether we're going to fall into that trap or not. Gil doesn't. Larry does. But as we go through life, we sometimes find that we fill it up with things that we think are going to make us happy, and they really don't. We try to make more money so we can buy more things to impress more people that we don't even like. It's been said, and in this study that I was reading, it says, people were finding out, it says the Lewis Harris poll showed that 71% of those families, now this was back in the early 2000s, like 2003, earning $40,000 or more annually, it says, would give up a day's pay each week for an extra day of free time. Leisure time, not money, is becoming the status symbol of the new century. So, even if we put all of our emphasis on time, still isn't going to make us happy. It's not enough. Number 6, collectibles. Ecclesiastes 2:8 says that he amassed silver and gold for myself and treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired the male and female singers and a harem as well, the delight of a man's heart. Some have a hobby called collecting. To some it's a hobby. To others it's a disease. Especially to the spouse that's not the collector. There is stuff. We collect all kinds of things. Stamps, coins, baseball cards, autographs, figurines, dolls. What? Frogs. Had a lady that I knew from my hometown. She collected elephants. There are people that collect Disney pins, right, Jeff? People collect things. I knew a lady that was married 8 times. Guess what she collected? Lots and lots of alimony. But people collect things, and they think that those things are going to make them happy. But one of the worst things people try to collect, they think it's going to make them happy, is money. Let's hoard it. Let's put it away for a rainy day. A lot of times, folks, the church is experiencing rainy days, and we still have to hold on to what we have and not give it to the Lord who needs it. Many of us are like the banker that was from a small town Virginia church that was having roof problems. It was leaking, and they needed a new roof in the worst of ways. Now, most of the congregation was very poor except for this local banker. He was an ornery old cuss. And he would be the first in church, so he would get one of the back seats. Well, one day he was running late. He got behind a slow-moving truck, and there was an accident, so he had to wait. By the time he got there, they were several minutes into the service, and guess where the only seats were for this poor old gentleman to sit? Right down front. He's sitting there, and the preacher gets up and he starts to preach his message on giving and the importance of giving to the Lord. Well, about that time, a piece of the ceiling, which had been leaking, fell and hit him right in the head. Well, as he sits there, the man is so frustrated, he is so upset, he's so angry because he got hit in the head with that. He says, "I'll give $1,000 toward repairing that roof." And one of the men in the back, probably Pat Gramley, yelled out, "Hit him again, Lord! Hit him again!" Many times we put our emphasis on the things we collect, and we're not willing to part with them until it's affecting us personally. But those things we collect, Solomon says, aren't going to bring happiness into our lives. The last, or next to the last, number 7, is music. Ecclesiastes 2:8 says, "I amassed silver and gold for myself and treasures of the king and provinces. I acquired male and female singers." So whether it's playing music or listening to music, music can bring us happiness for a time. It sets a mood. I know there have been times, I don't really play piano that well, but I sit down and play at it. And there's times that whenever I'm having a bad day, I'll come upstairs here when nobody's around, because I don't want you hearing me, and I'll play, or I'll start singing. And it makes me happier. It makes me feel better for a while. But you know what? It doesn't always stick. Music can bring us some joy and some happiness, but it usually won't last. We have television stations, radio stations for every genre of music there is that we can listen to. But many of us view life and the important things like the little boy who attended church for the first time and was asked by his grandma after church, "Well, how did it go?" Well, he replied, "The music was nice, but the commercial was way too long." Our time with God shouldn't be just a commercial. It should be the time that we really emphasize, the time that we really enjoy. And music can be a part of that. But music in and of itself, Solomon says, does not bring about happiness. And the last one, Ecclesiastes 2:8, he says, "I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well." A harem. Fellas, how many of you would be happy with a harem? You're looking over at your wife going, "I'm not raising my hand." In our society today, so many people think sex will make them happy. We have equated sex and love, and they're not the same. They are different, though they can be together in that relationship. We see it in movies, we hear it on the radio, we experience it in magazines and billboards that sex is going to make you happy. Well, let me just remind you, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. You should see Frank's face right now and what his eyes did. 700 wives? 300 concubines? Now, this is a guy that had sex apparently a lot with all of these wives. And I'm just going to be out front here with you. We're all, well, most of us are adults here, but these kids could probably teach us some things. But sex is a part of life, and sex is pleasurable. But that in and of itself is not enough. There are young people today that go from, they call it now hooking up with this person or that person, and they think, oh, I'll be happy. It'll bring me pleasure, it'll bring me joy, it'll bring me happiness. But you know what? It doesn't. It may for a minute. It may for a season. But then it goes away. Solomon says this does not bring about happiness. Story is told about a mother that went to stay with her son. His name was Brian. He was in his 20s. And when she went to visit him for the weekend, she found out he had a roommate. His roommate's name was Angie. And that's not short for Angelo. Well, she found out that this woman was his roommate, and she showed her disapproval. He said, Mom, you don't have to worry about anything. Quit being so old-fashioned about things. We're not sleeping together. She has her room and her bed. I have my room and my bed. Mom said, oh, okay. Well, she stayed through Sunday evening. She left and she went home. And 3 or 4 days later, she gets an email from her son, Brian. It says, Dear Mom, I'm not saying that you did take Angie's gravy ladle from the house. And I'm not saying that you did not take the gravy ladle. But the fact remains that it has been missing ever since you were here for dinner last weekend. Love, Brian. A day later, Mom sends Brian an email back. It says, Dear son, I'm not saying that you do share a bed with Angie. And I'm saying you do not share a bed with Angie. But the fact remains that if she was sleeping in her own bed, she would have found her ladle by now. That's pretty good. The conclusion to what Solomon is saying is sex in and of itself is meaningless. What do we get from all of this? As the worship team comes, I'll tell you. You need to understand that many of these projects are not evil in and of themselves. It's when we look to them to provide the happiness that our error occurs. Solomon was king of the most powerful nation of his time, and he made a mistake when he attempted to find happiness in everything else except the one thing that truly brings happiness. Ecclesiastes 2:11 gives us his conclusion. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. what he comes to the realization is this: nothing in this world is going to make you happy, truly happy. The only thing that will is a relationship with the Lord. And I want to encourage you in that today. If you're trying to find joy and happiness in the things we talked about today, or maybe something else, you're chasing the wind. It comes from a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I want to encourage you today, if you've not already, to make that decision and go that route and depend on him for the true joy and happiness and fulfillment and pleasure that he has to offer.